Hello and welcome to today's episode. I'd like to talk to you about a very important issue, and that's the issue of gun violence, specifically gun violence in the schools. In the middle of last month, there was the tragic murders of 17 people at MSD High School in Parkland, Florida. However, unlike some other mass shootings, the survivors of this one have taken things into their own hands to try to make change. If you follow the internet, especially Twitter, if you watch cable news, I'm sure you've seen some of these kids advocating for their various positions. The most well known of this group is David Hogg, who most of us have seen, Emma Gonzalez and Cameron Kasky, and perhaps slightly less well known at this point is Kyle Kashuv. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Before we go any further, I agree that we need to stop the proliferation of guns in this country. There's too many guns, and the answer isn't more guns. That's not the answer. Eventually, we need to realize that guns are a highly dangerous thing. They are not the devices that existed when the Constitution was written, and we need to work to eliminating access to certain types of guns, as well as certain people who shouldn't have access to them shouldn't get them. That is a long-term, possibly generational fight. That's what David, Emma, and Cameron push for, and I agree with them that that is the long-term goal. However, Kyle, who was very different from some of his classmates in his views, very strong advocate of the Second Amendment, very strong Republican with conservative values. Nevertheless, Kyle has been pressing for legislation with our congressman. He has been talking to members of both parties, including Senator from Connecticut, who is strongly for gun control, Orrin Hatch, who is not. He's talked to the president. He's talked to members of the cabinet. Very, very respectful in all of his interactions. That's one of his big things. He feels that his classmates are not being respectful. I'm not getting into that argument. However, Kyle has proposed legislation. I don't think, not that he came up with it himself. However, he is pushing for legislation called Stop Violence in School Act. And I think that it is something that we can get behind as an interim. I understand some of the other people involved in this feel that if we pass something that's honestly fairly weak, that it will then be, oh, we've won, we've declared victory, we've solved the problem of school violence. And you know what? That is exactly what the current administration, the current Congress will do. But what the current Congress will not do is pass anything meaningful. So do we do nothing, hoping that in the future we can get something good accomplished, or do we do something now that might help? This act is not bad. It doesn't do enough, and I don't think it'll stop most shootings. What it does do is it provides grants to the states, which is great, because then the states can decide what works best for them. They can use these grants for training in the schools, training school resource officers, training students on what to do in the case of a school shooting, and perhaps in some circumstances having armed people within the schools. I'm not opposed to that in the abstract. Money for security infrastructure, cameras, possibly metal detectors. Again, I'm not for making our schools into prisons, but possibly sometimes we need that, unfortunately. The most important two parts: in-school assessment and intervention of possibly dangerous individuals. Dangerous, probably spelled something wrong there. I think that it provides money so that most of these times when a school shooting occurs, there's sort of an idea that that might be the one who did it. But their schools lack the resources to identify that, and even if they identify it, they can't do anything about it. So that leads to our fourth part: creating programs and grants that will enable the schools to coordinate with local law enforcement. So that way individuals who shouldn't be getting guns don't get them. Now, I know this is not enough. It's not even close to enough. It only addresses schools. And it won't stop all of them. Oh my goodness. Hey, if I didn't spell something wrong, it wouldn't be Hands of Science. All right, so it only addresses the schools. It does nothing for street violence, for other types of crime, for domestic abuse. But let's say that it only saves 10 people a year. 10 people, 10 lives. Maybe it stops one school shooting a year. Let's say it takes 10 years for David, Kyle, and Emma and their other classmates to get more meaningful legislation passed, and or voting in new politicians or amending the Constitution, whatever it takes. Well, that's 100 people. Do we let 100 people die because this is a very imperfect act? I say no. Let's save what we can. If this bill was a bad thing, if this made it worse, if this mandated that you arm all the teachers, mandated locking down schools, I'd be opposed to it. It doesn't mandate that. It just grants the states some money and some direction in how to go, and they can decide what works best for them. Nothing in this bill stops more serious legislation in the future, and it might save lives. Why not get behind it? So I say, everybody out there, go and support the Stop School Violence Act. And then, you know what? If that's not enough, and it isn't, push for more. But don't stop good legislation because it's not perfect. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. All right. You'll find below descriptions. I'll send a link for the bill. I'll send links for Cameron, Emma, David, and Kyle. And I'll let you decide if this is a piece of legislation you can get behind. All right, thanks.